Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to episode 3 of the Too Long Didn't Read Fitness podcast. Today, once again, we're joined with co-host Aaron. I'm Coach Cadd. Today, we're talking all things supplements. Now, this is a really big one and something that I think more people should know. Now, this was a really fun episode and we got to talk about a lot of things that Aaron and I spend a lot of our time repeating to our clients over and over again. There's a lot of marketing out there around supplements. To be honest, there's not very many that you need to know. But knowing a little bit about the science and why certain things work or don't work can make you essentially marketing proof. So hopefully the value from this episode goes a long way beyond just what does and doesn't work. Hopefully it equips you with some tools to actually think about these things long term. As always, I hope you really love the show today. We're going to get into it right now. Aaron, do you want to kick us off with a bit of a TLDR recap? What have we gone over today? But more importantly, let's just put some things in the bin and let's put some things on the shelf. What is going in the supplement bin in the Hoey household?
Right. So in the bin, first up, we've got Bcaas and fat burners. They're both going in the bin, and we're going to save our money on those because they're just not going to do it for us. Test boosters, they're going in the bin. If you do need something to boost your testosterone, as Braden said, it's going to be something which you're probably better off going over the counter or under the counter, preferably over the counter. So check with your local medical professional for that one. But anything which says it's going to boost your testosterone and turn you into basically an alpha male Jason Momoa, Conan the Barbarian, that can go in the bin. We don't need that. What's going on the shelf? So protein. If you struggle to hit your protein and you need a cheap, convenient source of protein powder, that's definitely going on the shelf. What type of protein you get is going to be down to your individual goals and needs. Creatine's going on our shelf. It's got a great cost to benefit ratio. And yeah, it's just a really, really effective supplement. The only caveat is the muscle cells need to be saturated for it to be effective, which requires long-term use. So don't use creatine the same way you use caffeine. Make sure you're taking your 5 grams of creatine a day to get that long-term chronic benefit. And then the last one, which is going on the shelf, or it probably doesn't make it to the shelf in Braden's house, it goes straight into his hand and then straight down his gullet, is caffeine. So caffeine, pick your poison, whether it's going to be a Red Bull, a coffee, or maybe even just a no-dose tablet. And then assess your tolerance, probably start low and then increase slow. And just, find where your tolerance sits, find out what doses you like, find out what methods you like what kind you like, whether it's like a coffee or a pill or whatever, and go from there. That's my TLDR recap.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are on episode 3 of the Too Long Didn't Read podcast today. Today's going to be an interesting one, a little bit different from kind of the overall structure of the podcast normally. But basically, we're going to talk about supplements today because this is always something as coaches we get a lot. And, it's a massive industry and a lot of people are spending their money on supplements every day, getting some effect, but realistically, probably not much value. And we're going to dive into a little bit today about what you should look for, what you shouldn't look for, and basically what to avoid. So my name is Braden. I'm everywhere on social media as Coach Cadd. I'm joined today again with co-host Aaron. How are you, mate?
Hey, Braden. I'm not too bad. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aaron. You can find me on social media as Aaron Hoey _. I am a health and fitness coach, amateur bodybuilder and powerlifter, and also full-time pharmacy student from Melbourne, Australia. I met Braden while he used to live down under before he decided to travel abroad and get caught up in COVID lockdowns. And just looking forward to having a chat to everyone today about supplements, which is an area which I find really interesting and really enjoy.
Now, you, Aaron, I believe, have just finished writing a bit of a supplement guide anyway, so you're fresh on the knowledge here.
Yeah, so just finished up a small a supplement handbook, which I wrote for the company I work with called JPS Health and Fitness. The idea behind it was that there's a whole lot of pseudoscience out there, and I know that a lot of coaches don't necessarily have the time or the knowledge to kind of pour through large amounts of literature and find out what does and doesn't work for their clients and what doses to use. So my plan was to kind of just create like a short guide of some of the more common supplements in the industry, some of the ones that work, some of the ones that completely don't work, and just have like a bit of a run guide so that if coaches have like a resource on hand, so that when clients do inevitably come and ask them about supplements, they've got something to fall back on that they can trust, that they know isn't written by somebody who's actually trying to sell them something. Because I think that a lot of the evidence or a lot of the information that people get in the industry around supplements is usually written by supplement companies or people who are trying to sell them something. And I think that that conflict of interest can lead to a lot of misinformation.
100%. It's I know I've definitely been there, and even I've been a coach for coming up on 10 years now, and even then, when I still walk into a supplement store, you still get the guy coming up from behind the counter just giving you the whole stack, and I'm like, I know for a fact these don't work, but they're still, you tell them you're a coach, but especially if they're a good salesman, like they know what to say, and there's always a flash in your head that you're like, you know what, you're absolutely right, this is the reason I don't look like Ronnie Coleman, because you can make it sound so fancy and pseudoscientific, and especially today in this COVID world, we're not going to go into it today, but when you bring in the naturopathic medicine and some of the, whether it's essential oils or whether it's autoimmune or immune system boosters, like there's so much out there. So I think today we're going to really try and work in, just dive into basically the simple ones, what you need to worry about, what you don't. Aaron, what's your days looking like at the moment? I think you were giving me a bit of a rundown on what you've been into today, but just give us 2 topics that you're studying at the moment that's really piquing your interest.
Or really piquing my interest. So I've probably got 2 main areas, and one thing which I want to kind of really reiterate for those who aren't super familiar with like the university model surrounding medicine is that, especially as a student, they have to make it incredibly broad. You just do not have time to really go into the real nuance behind really specific medicines, which is unfortunate because that would be ideal, but they really leave that to the specialists. As a student, they really try to almost crash course you in a lot so that you end up with a very broad knowledge. And then ideally, when you graduate and go out into the wide world, you kind of follow your interests. And that way you end up with like very knowledgeable specialist people in areas where they are required. At the moment, the 2 kind of coolest things I'm studying is learning a lot about like antidepressants and antipsychotics. They are very interesting and very, very complicated medicines. And the second one we're doing a lot of antibiotics and a lot of antibiotics, antimicrobials, infections, and how they can be used not just in like a hospital setting, but also like from a wider community, and how medical professionals are responsible for ensuring that they prescribe those medicines correctly.
Very cool. I also, back once upon a time, I always say this whenever I'm interviewed on a podcast, I always like to throw this in there just because I think it's just a weird intro fact. But I was choosing between psychology and parasitology when I was choosing my career paths, right? I chose coach, which is closer to psychologist than anything else, but I love biology and like parasitology and stuff. But I've actually got a couple of friends. I actually thought about going back into uni and doing epidemiology, but I've also got a friend who was, I think she was at a master's level of psychology and then switched to epidemiology, because what better time in human history to study epidemiology than during a pandemic, right? It's never going to be more practical. You're never going to be more motivated to keep an eye on what's going on. So I think especially the antimicrobial side of things would be a little bit interesting now. I know for you and I in the fitness industry, the industry is definitely heading a lot further, and I hate using this term, but down this holistic pathway of actually starting to open the conversation towards mental health and antipsychotics and depression as well. And I think you and I would both agree that fitness and the lifestyle of fitness potentially has a lot to play in breaking some of the habits the detrimental habits that can come with, actual depression. But I think, it'll probably be interesting for you as well to take a step back and actually have a bit better in-depth look at, okay, here's the actual physiology behind depression. Here's where the role of medicine is absolutely needed. And here's the complementary role that lifestyle can play. I'm just throwing out a lot of words there, but is that something that you see? Does this add to your role as a coach?
Yeah, so I was really impressed actually when I started studying this, because at first I was a little bit, I'm not going to say skeptical, but I was a little bit worried that I was going to get in and it was going to be like, okay, like someone's upset, like boom, give them an antidepressant, like boom, give them like a benzodiazepam or something like that. And I was like, oh, like that's definitely not the kind of lens I want to look through these kind of medicines with. And it's not the kind of practitioner I want to, like, I don't want to be the kind of practitioner who really, really promotes the usage of these things. But when you actually look at the therapeutic guidelines and the guidelines we're supposed to follow, you actually see that like steps like 0, 1, and 2 are all a combination of like lifestyle modifications and like cognitive behavioral therapy and counseling before you actually get to pharmacotherapy. And when I was reading all of those, I felt very impressed and quite proud to be a health and fitness coach, because it's like, yeah, wow, it's like we know how big an issue like depression and anxiety is in this current day and age. And to see that like social support, getting like good sleep habits, like good, well-rounded diet, and making sure you're exercising regularly are literally the first points of call that you're supposed to do for people who are depressed. It's like that was really cool. I do like, obviously there is a bit of nuance and things like that. Like if people have like some very complicated depression, or if they've got comorbidities, like they might be depressed, but they also might be schizophrenic. It's like all of a sudden the medicine probably has to be just like, yeah, brought forward a little bit more. Like it has to be, there's actually a word for it. I can't remember, like upregulated or so. But yeah, for most cases, it was very cool to see that just the role that nutrition and lifestyle and fitness does have on most people's health and well-being.
Awesome. It's it looks like big pharma is slipping if they're letting some non-drug interventions slip into their guidelines.
Absolutely. Or it's a chance for the supplement stores to start really trying to cash in.
Trying to fill that hole. Absolutely. Look, so we're going to jump pretty much straight into it. I did just want to touch on something that we kind of talked about a little bit off camera. And we're going to try and dive into this because I know it's a passion rabbit hole for both of us. But we talked briefly off camera about the whole concept of NEAT. And you get a lot of people these days starting to appreciate, and well, I mean, in some cases, almost overappreciate, but start to appreciate the value of NEAT, and especially with the rise of Apple Watches or smartwatches, Garmin. Everyone's like constantly got their step tracker and their sleep tracker and things like that. And you were telling me a bit about a client that you started working with who was struggling to hit their steps as an effect of the weather, right? And we both come from Melbourne. I'm in Denmark now, which is not famous for its sun and vitamin D. So this is something that I've experienced as well. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about kind of your experience, what you had with your client, and kind of how you workshop that?
Yeah, sure. So my client was based in London. So at the moment, very cold, and also in varying stages of lockdowns and restrictions. And so basically our issue was that, yeah, she was finding it really, really difficult to get her activity levels up, didn't have access to a gym. She had a little bit of home equipment, but not too much. And we kind of sat down and had a conversation, and our conversation mainly was around that when life's throwing us really big curveballs, and COVID restrictions and really, really freezing cold weather is a pretty big curveball. Just doing our best and finding whatever solutions we can to the situations is probably going to be enough, and not trying to think about, oh, what could be if everything was perfect, because everything's not perfect. So we just kind of have to make the best of a bad situation. So our solution for her was She was going to put on a podcast or put on some news in her headphones or ring a friend, and she was just going to pound the stairs, go up and down the stairwell in her apartment complex, and try to do a few flights of stairs over the course of maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and do that once a day, maybe twice a day if time permitted. And yeah, that was our solution for her.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the interesting things, you get that. So when we talk about NEAT, right, we're talking about that non-exercise activity-based thermogenesis. I always confuse that one. But it's basically, theoretically, it's movement that you get throughout the day without being conscious of it. And I know this is a bit of a hot button for you as well, that as soon as you start kind of aiming for steps, technically it's not NEAT anymore. But it's still, I think for me, and I'm pretty sure for you, it's still a pretty good proxy for movement, right? If someone has 15,000 steps on their phone or their pedometer or their watch or whatever at the end of the day, maybe that's not technically 15,000 steps. And even if they're aiming for it, then it's not NEAT movement, but it's still a good indicator that they're moving a fair bit, right? And I had one client that literally went from 11,000 steps a day, and then 2 weeks into lockdown, she had 60 steps a day on her phone. And that's like, obviously, I assume she had to do more than 60 steps a day just going to the toilet and back. But she was also spending literally 15 hours a day at her laptop working, right? So even though it's not 100% accurate, I mean, it's not like she's getting an extra 7,000 steps a day that are unaccounted for. Like, she's very sedentary, right? And that's where the value of kind of NEAT tracking, I think, comes in, with that awareness more than anything. I know for me, like, one of the workarounds has just been that I will intentionally walk to buy a takeaway coffee every day. Like, that for most of lockdown has been sometimes the most NEAT exercise I'll get in a day. And it's not flashy. It's definitely not 10,000 steps, but it also is substantially more steps than I would get if I wasn't going out of my way to leave the house. I know you log a lot of steps, Aaron, but what's your experience been like that, either for yourself or with clients, of, just trying to basically improve on NEAT movement however you can?
Yeah. So as you specified before, with NEAT being basically that insequential movement, if you do find that your steps are really, really low, what the principle of what you try to do is you try to replace your NEAT with activity thermogenesis, so intentional movement. So if you find that, like, you're getting really, really low amounts of steps, you can say, okay, like, I am going to go for a 20-minute walk to get a coffee, or I am going to maybe do a few laps of the house or something like that. So just to kind of get those steps and that activity up. I've got there's a few strategies I've given to clients. Like, they might, if they take public transport to work, they might get off the tram a few stops before they get home and then walk the last couple of blocks. I've had clients who are like really busy corporates who tell me, oh no, like, I can't get more than 2,000 steps a day. Like, I just don't have time. And I'm like, okay, you've got a set of AirPods, put your AirPods in, you're on conference calls for hours at a time, be on your conference calls and just walk around your office, like walk around the building, go for a walk around the block. And all of a sudden that 2,000 steps turns into 8,000 steps pretty quick. You can actually also do the reverse, which is what I'm trying to do at the moment. So I rack up some pretty ridiculous steps if I'm not consciously trying to keep my steps down. I'll probably average about 15 or so thousand a day. But given that I'm trying to really put on as much weight as I can and try to bulk up over the next few months, I'm actually trying to cap my step count. So I'm trying to actively keep it under about 8,000 if I can. And that allows me to not have to force feed myself every day in order to see the scales go up. So I've done really well today because I'm sitting on about 7,200. So mission accomplished today, Braden.
Well played. Yeah, there is the Pokemon Go causing a problem there, mate. We're getting too many steps up and about. There's a girl who's a bikini competitor. She's a coach out of Melbourne named Sherelle, and she did a post on this ages ago that was really interesting, when she was talking about she would naturally get 20 to 22, I think, kind of 1,000 steps a day. And that became a really big problem going into a competition prep, because she would start her daily steps at 20,000, and then obviously as your energy levels drop during comp, it becomes harder and harder to maintain that. So all of a sudden you've got to take these more extreme calorie drops to match the energy, the decrease in NEAT activity. And it's just an interesting concept. Most people are not in that position, and same for yourself, where they're racking up too many steps in a day. But it just goes to show what the value in tracking a lot of these things actually goes a lot further. Just knowing how many steps you're doing on average is probably where most of the value comes from.
I would agree.
Easy. Look, so we're going to jump straight into some supplements here. So we're going to take, we're going to try not to go too deep on this because this is a bit of a passion project for us. We've talked a lot about this off camera already. But look, we're going to start basically on the naughty list. We're going to run through some of the biggest ones that you'll hear, and really, and really the biggest waste of money. And I think probably the one that tops that list would have to be BCAAs. So we're going to start straight there, go for the kick in the guts. Aaron, talk to us about BCAAs.
Yeah, so BCAAs are basically, the BCAA stands for branched chain amino acids. And now when we talk about protein, like protein's a very, very important macronutrient. It's got lots and lots of positives, which it does in the body, like mainly around like repair and regeneration and growth of tissue. So that's not just muscle tissue, but all kinds of tissue in the body. And that protein is made up of amino acids. Now in the body, we've got essential and non-essential amino acids. So essential amino acids are amino acids which the body can't synthesize, which means that we need to get them from our diet. And non-essential amino acids are amino acids which the body is basically able to synthesize. Now, branched chain amino acids it's a supplement which is mainly comprised of 3 specific amino acids, which are isoleucine, leucine, and valine. And they can be found in different ratios depending on the kind of BCAA supplement that you get. And the concept behind BCAAs is that by taking these branched chain amino acids, we're going to be stimulating anabolism. So we're going to be hopefully like fueling our muscles and preventing catabolism. So preventing muscle breakdown. So that's the main like theoretical concept behind BCAA supplementation. Now, what happens in practice is we basically see that once a minimum level of protein has been hit during the day, those BCAA supplements basically become redundant. So if you are hitting a good amount of protein per day, let's say 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So for a 100 kilogram individual, that'd be 150 grams a day, which isn't too much. For a 50 kilogram individual, like a small female, that's only 75 grams of protein a day. Again, not too much. If you're hitting those values of protein a day, BCAAs practically become redundant. So the only place that they're useful is if you're not eating enough protein per day, in which case you should just eat more protein. So that's BCAAs for me. Braden, would you like to add anything to that?
No, that's it. I mean, I don't really know. It seems to me, at least, that BCAAs have become more well-known now that people have proven them wrong than they were necessarily in the mainstream initially, right? I heard a lot of big claims about them initially, that you needed to have BCAAs during your workout to make sure that you're in this constant, the mythical constant state of constant anabolic state all the time, right? We threw away the anabolic window a little bit, and we replaced that with just trying to stay anabolic throughout the whole workout. So a lot of people, I think, were taking these BCAAs during their workout. The other thing where they were primarily used as a bit of a marketing tool was BCAA pre-workout supplements. And I think the value in that just became, like I said, just all marketing. But the fact that you can make that most BCAA supplements are like delicious and fizzy and taste like lemon or watermelon or something as well. Like, I think it was more about the flavor combinations that could be done that tasted like chemicals and made you feel like they were going to do something, right? But a lot of companies now are taking the BCAAs out of it because it's not working as a marketing tool anymore, but they've still got exactly the same product otherwise, right? It's still just basically caffeine, beta-alanine, and and flavoring. So, I mean, that's the biggest one. I think there's been a lot of nails in the BCAA coffin, but like you said, I mean, if you're the only potential role in BCAA supplementation that I've seen at least is, if you're under eating protein, but for the same merit, you're better off having actual protein from your diet. But as we're kind of going to talk about later, you could also just have a protein shake and probably get infinitely more value for equally the same price, if not a little bit cheaper anyway. Look, I think that's probably all we really need to say on BCAAs. If anyone has any questions, feel free to DM us on those. But I think BCAAs, unless there's anything else you want to talk about, they've just had so many nails hammered into that coffin over the last probably 2-3 years that I think it's finally starting to catch on to the mainstream.
Yep, I don't think we need to add a whole lot to that. BCAAs are basically, proven to be quite redundant, and we can move on to our next supplement.
All right, so BCAAs are in the bin. What else have we got, Aaron?
So next up in the bin, we've got a supplement which is also very similar in how it's marketed, but the mythical fat burning supplements. So how good would it be if we could walk into a supplement store, we've got a few kilos to lose, Stereosonic might be coming up, or the latest music festival. You look on the shelf and you see ISO Cut Shredder 3000 and you're like, oh, scoop of this a day and I will look like Ziz himself. So you grab that, you spend all your money on that, you take that home, you start scooping that into your pre-workout, and a couple of months later, you realize that it was doing absolutely nothing. So fat burning supplements, there are different ones, but they all usually are marketed very similarly. The common ingredients you're going to see in fat burning supplements, it's going to have things such as caffeine. It might have some other kind of stimulants like a green tea extract or something similar. And then you will usually have some amino acids, maybe some niacin or some beta-alanine. So niacin and beta-alanine are two interesting ones. So beta-alanine it makes you feel very tingly. It gives you almost like this prickly sensation. And niacin is a B vitamin, which gives you like a red flushing feeling. And the reason that those two are predominantly put into fat burners isn't so that you actually yield any benefit from them, but it's more so you actually feel something. Because if you feel something, you're under the impression that the supplement is doing something. It's like, oh my God, I literally feel the fat burning. When in reality, it's like the supplement company knows that they're going to have some kind of physiological effect, which is noticeable. So it's going to ensure that they whack that into the supplement so that you think that it's working. The reason it's got so thermogenics in it, like caffeine and other stimulants, is because by upregulating, by basically putting stimulants in the product and basically proving that it's going to upregulate your sympathetic nervous system, so elevate your heart rate. That way they can't actually get sued for saying that it's going to burn body fat, because it is going to boost your metabolism in the sense that it's actually going to give you a little bit of a sympathetic energy kick. Is it going to actually translate to large amounts of body fat being lost? No, most definitely not. But it's going to feel pretty good, and it means that they can get away with marketing it. Anything to add on that, Braden?
That's really interesting. I love what you said about the beta-alanine, niacin. Like that is actually, and there's a few studies around placebo that I would love to dig into on an upcoming episode. But that's the thing. At the end of the day, most pre-workouts, the best benefit you're going to get from it is a bit of a pump. And the actual value in pre-workouts to me is that if they're loaded with beta-alanine, niacin, caffeine, you're going to be so jittery that it's actually hard to sit on the couch. Like that is basic. It's going to be uncomfortable to sit on the couch. And that is the main benefit in, using some kind of external motivation to get your ass to the gym. As far as actual physiological benefits in increasing your workout, it's going to be mostly placebo, right? But they do have their place for that. That's an interesting concept that you raise about protecting them from being sued. Right. So, I mean, this is a big topic and I love throwing these things to you and then saying like, we'll keep it pretty surface level. But can you talk a little bit about that concept of I guess fatty acid mobilization versus fat burning, because it's similar when people talk about, kind of fasted cardio. We're talking about, what I might be melding topics here, so feel free to simplify. But, the concept of green tea extract having some value and caffeine having some value in mobilizing fatty acids, and how that actually still will not translate to losing weight on the scales.
Yeah, sure. The other one, which is often thrown in there as a fatty acid mobilizer, would be L-Carnitine, which is an amino acid, which basically, I'm pretty sure from memory, it helps shuttle fatty acids into the mitochondria. So the best analogy that I've ever, I can't remember if I came up with this or whether someone else said it, but it's pretty good because I've remembered it, is imagine a game of musical chairs. So if everyone gets up and moves around, but then at the end of the round, the music stops and everyone's got a chair and they sit down, you've had a whole lot of mobilization, but there's actually no net movement of people like in or out of the game. And that's basically like a fatty acid mobilizer. Like the fatty acid might like jump around the body a fair bit, but unless you've actually gone and burnt it off, like actually had like a net shift in energy balance, which causes like energy to be lost as mechanical energy, you're not going to have a loss of body fat. So that would be like if you actually have everyone stand up musical chairs, everyone runs around, but you remove a chair. So like you add a caloric deficit into someone's day, whether that be through exercise or nutrition. You take a chair out, music stops. Oh, person who doesn't have anywhere to sit, he has to go. So that's like the best analogy I've heard. It's like, it's the difference between like mobilization versus like elimination.
That's amazing. I love that. And that's kind of the reason I like that so much as well, is because that's kind of what it feels like, right? If you have too much caffeine and you are getting some of that anxiety, or you have a good pre-workout and you feel like you need to do something, like you feel jittery, but I wouldn't necessarily say like that's also not the same as feeling like you're actually losing fat. Like it's just this chemical kind of stimulation more than anything. And that, I think, is one of the biggest. I mean, if people listen to this podcast and they take away nothing more than that analogy and the difference between fatty acid mobilization, or what people call fat burning, and the actual loss of like fat mass, those are two very, very different things. And there's a reason you will never see any supplements marketing fat mass loss, right? They need to say words like fat burning that actually mean, I don't know if we're allowed to swear on here, but sweet fuck all. It's our podcast. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear.
That's all right. I'll let you off on that one. And I think this is really cool. I don't want to go into too much on this because I could end up opening the can of worms, which sees us going on for a long time. But there is actually some weight loss drugs out there which are actually shown to work, but they are weight loss drugs and they are basically prescription only medications, which doctors have to clinically assess you and then decide whether or not you are suitable for those medications. And one of them, which is got a lot of controversy around it, is phentermine, which goes under the brand name is Duramine. And that actually works. Like that, you will see body fat loss on that. And the mechanism which phentermine uses is basically I think it's an amphetamine salt, or it's kind of like an amphetamine derivative, and it's very similar to like speed. Like it's a very strong stimulant. It'll jack up the sympathetic nervous system as a byproduct of jacking up the sympathetic nervous system. You are likely going to be more active, but also because your sympathetic nervous system is so active, your appetite will dampen and you will eat less. So the reason I'm actually telling this story is because like even the fat burners which do work, they don't magically work by making you burn fat. They work via physiological mechanisms which make you increase your movement, and they decrease your appetite, which means that you're going to decrease the amount of energy which you're taking in. So even like these really complicated, fancy pharmaceuticals which do work, they still come down to those fundamental basics of energy balance, which coaches harp on about over and over and over. And that's because those fundamental basics are what works. And those supplement companies, they thrive off that because they're able to look at that mechanism and go, aha, like we could say that something jacks up your sympathetic nervous system, which means that you burn more calories while dampening your appetite. And then we're going to use a caffeine or a green tea extract, which is a very, very weak stimulant in comparison to what's in Duramine. But then they slap fancy coloring on it, fancy marketing on it, and they sell it for an absolute packet. So that was just kind of like the backstory behind that mechanism, which they're attempting to sell.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to, jump in there and say that, of course, none of this is anywhere even close to medical advice. But of course, this is, an absolute passion project for you and something that you'll be learning a lot more. So hopefully we can dig into a few more of the specifics and mechanisms further down the track. But the other one, I know there's another weight loss drug, lift something or other, that I can't remember off the top of my head. But again, there is quite a strong, I think it works more through appetite suppression than actual necessarily, back end physiology.
There are a fair few there which are appetite suppressants. So wouldn't be surprised if that's one. If you remember the name, send it through to me. I'll have a look at it.
Yeah, for sure. Look, so I mean, this kind of digs us into a really good place as well. And so the next one we're moving into is just an ongoing tangent. And I would love to see this podcast do a little bit to lower the sales of these kind of products, because these ones just really get me. But it does lead into something that I know you're very passionate about clarifying, which is that we need to have that conversation around the role of supplements versus drugs, right? And I mean, I can go on a rant on about it, but I think this is your time to shine. So do you want to just tell us some of your thoughts? And as someone studying this, it's a very important distinction, and it's something that I think more and more people need to understand, and it will make them a lot less gullible when it comes to marketing.
Yeah, sure. So the easiest way that I would explain it is that supplements are more likely to be used to be able to coax your physiology towards a certain direction. So supplements aren't they can be effective if used correctly. They can also be incredibly ineffective. But at the end of the day, it's then the effects you're going to get from a supplement are usually more so chronic, as in you see the benefits over a longer period of time, and your physiology is going to be slightly altered. Whereas medicines are a lot more regimented. Every single medicine that you see, if you've got a 50 milligram tablet of something, that has to be the same as another 50 milligram tablet, as opposed to potentially a vitamin supplement or a herb, where the amount of actual compound in a herb compared to a different herb might be a little bit different. So the drugs themselves are more regulated, and rather than trying coaxing physiology, they could be anywhere from coaxing physiology to hitting it with a sledgehammer, depending on what kind of drugs you're dealing with. I think that in the medical realm, if you're looking at hospitals and things like that, you could be dealing with drugs which is you're literally just slamming someone, you're manipulating someone's physiology like a Rubik's cube, just in order to kind of suit something. It's oh, you've got renal failure. That means your body basically can't filter blood. We're going to whack you on dialysis, which means that we're going to hook you up to a machine which literally filters your blood for you, and we're going to give you medications for that. It's kind of surreal, the amount of physical manipulation you can do to a human body when you've kind of got free reign to do what you need to do to help that individual. In comparison, supplements are, again, they can be used really well, but supplements aren't medicine. And if supplements worked as well as medicine, they would be medicine, and doctors would prescribe them. Medical companies would patent them, put little pretty labels on them, sell them, and make a lot more money than the people who are sitting at nutrition warehouse, whatever, trying to sell you a fat burner, which may or may not work.
Exactly right. I think that paints a really good picture as well. If we look at other disciplines of medicine, you think of surgery, or this will tie into the conversation we're about to talk about. But if someone goes through an operation to change their gender, right? And they go on all of these sex hormone replacement therapies and all of the drug protocols that come with that. We can see that externally as this massive intervention, right? If someone goes on chemotherapy, this is this massive life-altering intervention. But it doesn't need to be that extreme to have just as dramatic effect on your physiology. Like if you are putting someone on a weight loss drug, you are actually in a lot of cases making a massive change to their physiology. We can't see it. It doesn't seem as dramatic as surgery because you're not opening someone up and splitting their ribs. But what you can do with a few tablets every day is literally insane, because you can have an entirely different person just by manipulating, I say quote unquote, just by manipulating a few different things, right? My girlfriend's a type 1 diabetic, and I think every now and then I just stop and think how bizarre it is that we've got little vials of insulin around the house is literally the only thing keeping her alive. And it wasn't very many years ago where that just wasn't an option. And I think that when we start giving drugs the kind of respect that they are due from a scientific standpoint, it also puts into perspective probably how little the effect supplements are going to have for the majority of people. And I think one of the places that supplements do have more of a role, and a more dramatic role, is if they're bringing you up from a deficit in something. But there's a few different kind of, mental pictures for me, but that's going to kind of lead into something that we're going to talk about now, which is, Aaron, take us through testosterone boosters.
Yeah, so testosterone boosters are a really interesting one. So I don't know how popular they are at the moment. I do know they were wildly popular probably about 10 years ago, back when I was kind of getting it first into the fitness industry as like a 15-year-old. And I think one of the reasons why they were so big was because, for starters, if you look at testosterone, so testosterone is like an anabolic steroid. It's like the primary male androgen. And if someone uses testosterone, that's a really strong performance enhancing drug. And if you bring your testosterone levels up really high to super physiological levels, so that means like way higher than the body can naturally get to, and you bring your body up to super physiological levels with testosterone, you will grow large amounts of muscle mass and also experience a whole host of other physical effects. So I think the theory behind testosterone boosters are, let's find some herbs and some vitamins which are potentially going to raise our testosterone levels. And then you can get massive, just like your favorite bodybuilders, without actually having to do steroids. Like, you get the best of both worlds. You can stay natty, but you're going to be massive and you're going to have these really high testosterone. So then testosterone boosters started getting sold, and very gullible young bodybuilders were probably absolutely taking that stuff like as much as they could get their hands on. And then the research started coming through, and we actually started getting a good look at how this stuff worked. And we realized that muscle mass isn't probably as closely tied to testosterone as what we first thought. So increasing someone's testosterone by a few nanomoles, or however much it is, like still within normal physiological ranges, that's probably not going to do a whole lot for your muscle mass. Like, you might feel a little bit different, like you might have slightly more energy, maybe if it pulled you from a very like low, maybe basically like a a deficiency of testosterone up into like normal ranges, but you're not going to get those ridiculous effects which they were claiming you were going to get. So that's probably one of the ones which has been bashed the most, and probably sold the most by supplement companies trying to just get all in on it. All of us bodybuilders' insecurities about being under muscled and over fat,
which is always going to be part of the fun of body dysmorphia, which is going to the gym consistently. But look, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, at the end of the day, there's a reason, and we talked about this before the chat. Like, if you want something that's really going to work, it needs to be either an over the counter or under the counter supplement. Like, not supplement, sorry, drug. Like, we're talking the serious stuff. Because anything that aims to naturally, quote unquote, naturally bring up your testosterone levels, right? You have the amount of natural testosterone you're going to have already. anything that is going to have a slight effect on that is probably not going to have much of a downstream effect. Even if it does, like you said, even if it did bring up your testosterone slightly, there are no guarantees that that's going to make anywhere close to meaningful effort in how you actually look, right? And muscle building, putting on muscle, is such a long-term game that realistically a tiny bit of extra muscle is not actually going to be particularly meaningful, right? We need to be in the gym. We need to be putting on as much muscle as you can day in, day out for a really long time before it's going to be kind of a meaningful amount of muscle mass anyway. So spending a lot of money on something that will not have a meaningful effect on that is really not a smart way to actually do it. You're better off saving that money and spending on something that makes adhering to your diet actually easier.
Yep, 100% agree. Or spending that money on a good strength coach is going to be able to write you a good program so that you can actually go and train hard, train with a good structured program, which is going to enable you to get the most potent stimulus that you can get for hypertrophy, which is high quality resistance training. And that will probably put you in the best place to build muscle, rather than YOLOing your sessions and then also YOLOing your nutrition with some sneaky testosterone boosters alongside your meals.
100%. That's the thing with supplements, right? And especially, from I bash on them a lot, but like from a naturopathic standpoint or from a supplement standpoint, a lot of the objection you get is people saying like, oh, well, there's no downside. Like they say, often you'll hear like the good thing about supplements being that there's not really a downside a lot of the time for supplements or herbs, because we know, a drug will often have a huge range of side effects, right? Because it's a powerful effect and we expect powerful side effects in a lot of cases. And supplements, they'll be like, oh, well, maybe it's not doing anything, but I feel better when I take it and there's not much downside. But anything that you're spending money on and you're investing time and energy into consuming absolutely has a downside. So you could definitely be spending that money in a lot of different ways. And if you don't agree with that, then by all means donate your money to myself and Aaron on the podcast, and we will spend it. We will spend it for you in a meaningful way. So yeah, I don't think we need to dig too much into test boosters. The one thing I did wanted to run past you, Aaron, was I've heard this thrown out there, and I don't know, you might have a bit more of an idea of the actual physiological mechanisms behind this, but I have heard the absolute number as far as how much testosterone you have is not actually a very accurate measure of how healthy you are and how much muscle you'll put on, because it's more about how efficiently your body is transferring and using that testosterone. So you might have someone who is technically is on the lower ranges of testosterone, but they use that very well. And you'll have someone on the higher ranges of natural testosterone, and they will, not necessarily be at any more of an advantage. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that like overall, like androgens are pretty complex. Like we're not just looking at testosterone as like a single marker. It's not as if it's like, oh, yep, men have testosterone, females have estrogen. Like that's all there is. Like there's lots of like basically like different androgens which you've got floating around, and like they all react with each other slightly differently. They can be converted to each other back and forth at different ratios. And if you've got like if an endocrinologist wants to really kind of assess your hormone levels for whatever reason, he's not going to be looking at one certain level in isolation. He's going to be looking at multiple markers to kind of paint a diagnostic picture. The other thing which I want to kind of touch on is just having more or less testosterone is probably going to come with like not necessarily different like side effects or different positives or negatives, but just different effects as a whole. And then whether they're positive or negative is almost up to the interpretation of whoever's kind of reading into it. So I was like looking at some research a little bit earlier today, and I was looking at people who have or men who have higher levels of testosterone they may be less prone to metabolic diseases like diabetes and heart disease, but they also might be more prone to prostate cancer and potentially hypertension. So it's like it's kind of like Lyndon's one of my ex-colleagues used to say, for every gimme, there's a gotcha. And I think that applies completely to things like hormones and testosterone, where it's like if you're on too high side, too lower side, even somewhere in the middle, there's probably going to be a plethora of effects, which is going to be very, very individual based on a whole host of genetic and environmental factors. I don't know if that answered your question exactly, but
it's interesting regardless. The other point that I would just raise on that, and I know because I know, I've been there as well. And I know a lot of us, when we are 14, 15, 16 or more getting into the gym, there is a lot of that environmental pressure to do it, right? You're getting into the gym because you want to be bigger, you want to be better looking, you want to be more attractive to potential mates, to put it in a very biological term, right? You want to be able to get attention. And that's a lot of the marketing we know from testosterone boosters is it's not just, oh, this will give you more muscle. It's like, oh, I'll make you an alpha male. It'll make you like the king silverback and all this shit. That it's just, there is so much, it's not that easy, right? Humans are more complex than that. Taking horny goat weed before you work out or something is not going to make you more attractive to your potential partners. Even during your workout or for the weeks and months leading on to going out to parties and meeting people, it's more important that you're probably spending time doing some self-development stuff, using the gym to better yourself, than it is just to use that as a way to climb your way up the social food chain. Look, okay, yes, so I mean,
I agree.
BCAAs, fat burners, test boosters, basically in the bin. Let's talk about some things, what's worth looking at. So I think we're going to jump straight into protein because, again, that's one that gets a lot of marketing and a lot of miscommunication out there. So tell us about protein, Aaron.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on protein a little bit as we were talking about BCAAs. So protein is it's a macronutrient, which we get a lot of in our diets, hopefully. It's comprised of amino acids, and protein is predominantly used for restoration and growth of different tissues. Now, the amount of protein that people need in their diet is going to be a little bit different depending on populations, and the ranges are quite broad, but the general recommendations for general populations is going to be around 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of lean body mass. And for probably more of the athletic populations, those who are resistant training, probably going to be from 1.6 to 2.2. If any of you are in a contest prep and you're in a really large caloric deficit, an extended deficit, you may want to get that protein a little bit higher. Eric Helms has some really good evidence that you can get your protein intake up to maybe 3.3 grams per kilo if you're in a pretty extended deficit. But over that, you're probably not going to get too many more of the benefits that are associated with protein consumption. So protein powders, what protein powders are is they're basically a refined powder, and you basically refine the protein from milk or from casein. And what that will do is you get the protein without all of the other stuff. So if you get a protein isolate, which is highly refined, you'll get the protein, but you won't get the carbohydrates and the lactose and all those other bits and pieces. Not that they're bad, but you just don't get them. And you end up with a really convenient powder, which can be added to either milk or water to get yourself a nice solid amount of protein. One thing which I will almost always see with new clients, not all new clients, but typically clients who aren't active young men, when they come in and they start working out how much protein they eat in a day, you might be a 60 kilogram female and they're like, oh, I eat 40 grams of protein a day. And I'm like, wow, that's not much. What are our guidelines? 1.2 to 1.6. And then you can start talking to them more so about their values. We don't want to lose muscle mass as we age. If they're an older female, for example, we don't want to lose muscle mass when we age because that's associated with lack of strength, which is associated with falls and like inability to be able to like care for yourself. We don't want that. We want to maintain muscle as we age. Therefore, it's in our best interest to be eating a slightly higher protein diet. And they might say to me, oh, well, I don't like eating meat, or I don't like preparing large amounts of like protein rich food. And I'll say, not to worry, there is actually a really good supplement which can help you out. Check out a protein powder. It's really easy, convenient. You can stir it into like maybe like your breakfast, like have a smoothie or something like that. And one scoop of protein might be 24 grams of protein. And so you give that to Susan, the soccer mum, and all of a sudden she's basically like times the amount of protein she eats in a day by 1.5, like increased by 150% from 40 grams to about 65 grams. So all of a sudden, like boom, she's a lot closer to actually hitting that minimum amount of protein that we wanted to eat in a day. So protein powder, basically, as kind of like a summary, is a really convenient way to be able to get protein into your day. So it's not the protein itself, which is magic. We want protein in our diet, and protein powder is a very convenient vehicle to allow us to get more protein into our diet.
Cool. So something that you see a lot, and I definitely came from this mindset of protein powder itself being magic. Just to reiterate as well with what you're saying, the protein powder is not doing anything inherently magic. It's just a more convenient way to consume it, right? I think you and I would both agree that if you're getting more than that, if you're getting enough protein from your normal diet, then protein's not necessarily going to add any particular value there. I know a lot of females are scared of taking protein powders because it's marketed as this muscle building. It's marketed basically as testosterone. That same image of you have this and you'll turn into a fucking king silverback, right? But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. For men and women, protein is only as useful as I guess the context. It's only as useful as it actually allows you to intake, to bring up your daily protein intake. Just a quick shout out to the person who invented female specific protein powders, because they're definitely in hell now, but they deserve a raise because they would have sold so much extra protein to women just by putting the same thing in a pink packet with a female, lean athletic female on the front. They're definitely in hell, but they did do what they were supposed to for their brand. I think that's one of the most clever pieces of marketing I've ever seen.
Marketing. It's like help you build toned muscle as opposed to bulky muscle.
Absolutely. Look, I'll take either at this point, but I'm still taking my protein shake. So, okay, cool. Well, do you want to just quickly touch on then? I know there's a lot of again, marketing, but let's talk about casein, isolate, concentrate. We probably don't need to do a super deep dive into it, but just what is worth looking at, or what are the kind of pros and cons of each?
Yeah, sure. So like whey protein isolate is basically like a very, very refined version of protein powder. So like the refining process is just a little bit more extensive. It's still like a really high quality protein source. And one extra benefit of a whey protein isolate is because it'll have very, very low carbohydrates in it. It'll have very minimal lactose, which means it may be better tolerated by those who are lactose intolerant. One of the cons of being that little bit more refined, maybe it might be slightly more expensive than some of its other counterparts. But as a whole, whey protein isolate is probably going to be the weapon of choice for most individuals who are looking to pick up a protein powder. Whey protein concentrate is going to be similar, but it doesn't have quite the same levels of processing that isolate will have, which means it'll have slightly more carbs, fats, and lactose than the whey protein isolate. One of the benefits though is it might be slightly cheaper. So let's say you're a uni student, you don't really care that much about getting like a few extra carbs and fats in your protein powder. Like you don't mind too much. It's like, whatever. Like I need to eat anyway because you might be in a gaining phase or you might just be at maintenance. That might be a really good alternative and allow you to just save up a few extra pennies which you can spend on some other whole foods. Another one which gets a lot of marketing. Now, this one's an interesting one, but collagen protein. So collagen protein is one of those ones which can get a lot of marketing around it. And they claim some quite ridiculous health benefits in some instances. Now, most of the research around collagen has compared it to whey protein isolate. And when compared to whey protein isolate, you actually see that it's quite inferior for building muscle mass because it doesn't have the same complete protein amino acid profile that whey protein isolate will have. So it doesn't have enough of those essential amino acids, which the body can't synthesize. The benefits of protein powder, now, there is a little bit of research around this. I haven't read all of it. I've read some of it. But some of the benefits I've seen around collagen are collagen's potentially beneficial for those who suffer from some autoimmune disorders. So those with rheumatoid arthritis, I'm pretty sure collagen was like an effective supplement for them. And also I've read that collagen can be really useful for those suffering from soft tissue injuries. So there's two kind of nuances where collagen protein might actually be beneficial, but the way that collagen's marketed is that it's going to be some kind of like, almost like a combination of like, it's going to turn you into Miss Universe / Mr. Olympia. Like it's going to make you pretty and toned at the same time. It's like, don't know if it really works like that. The last one that I'll go into is casein. So casein is a slow releasing protein, which can be taken as an alternative to whey. And casein is slightly different to isolate in regards to its amino acid profile and also its digestive rate. So one of the benefits of casein is that it is digested slower, which could be really ideal for taking either before bed or during fasting windows, because it's got the release of amino acids will be slightly slower. But I think probably the biggest benefit of casein is the fact that it's a thicker consistency. And for those who are dieting, I find it a lot more satiating compared to a whey protein isolate. So whey protein isolate's almost like a chocolate milk, like it goes down quite easily, whereas a casein is a bit more sticky and it kind of sits a little bit heavier in your GI tract, which when you're dieting is ideal because it'll fill you up a little bit more. So if you're dieting or you potentially kind of want a protein snack between like long meals, casein might be a good option for you. Kick it over to you, Braden. Anything else to add?
No, really good wrap up. The collagen one's interesting. Like it's one of the reasons why it has gained, I think, such a foothold as a marketing ploy is because I think there is some at least preliminary research in, collagen playing a role in joint health. And like you said, with arthritis potentially. And it's one of those, there's a term for it around, there's like a technical cognitive bias phrase for it, but it's like the whole easy marketing sell of eating fat makes you fat. It would be nice if it worked that way, but also fat in the body is not called fat anymore. Like we have a more complex term for it compared to the fat that you eat, which is also not called fat in its technical term. It's just what we call it. And I don't know how much of the research into collagen is actually backed in science and how much is just because we can go collagen is in joints, collagen in food, that makes good, right? And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. Just a quick question, if you know the answer to it, is when we talk about collagen being good for joints, are we talking about, is collagen the supplement the same as collagen the protein supplement, or is there a different process to derive those two? Do you know?
That's a good question. I've got a feeling that collagen, the actual supplement, may, like if you buy just like a random kind of like collagen powder, it's still gonna have amino acids in it, but the concentration of those amino acids and how broad that profile of amino acids may differ depending on a straight collagen versus like a collagen like protein powder. But that's probably going to be more so due to the brand itself and how it's marketing that collagen, rather than saying, like collagen is different to a collagen protein powder. I think it's more so to do with the marketing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So, I mean, we'll add that to the list of stuff to do a little bit more research into, but I'm pretty sure at this point, like I said, unless you're working to fix some specific issue. I think for most people, collagen's probably not really going to play much of a role in at least from a body recomposition, putting on muscle standpoint, play much of a role. One thing I did want to mention, it's a really good point that you talked about casein, having a slower, I'm going to call it a slower digesting taste. Because as both of us have done like physique shows, we know that when you're at that extreme level of body composition or of leanness, the consistency of your food plays a massive role in how hungry you get, and it's so much more noticeable. I know one of the biggest things, and this is one of the first things I learned from that my best mate at the supplement store who wanted me to sell me everything. I learned that yes, like casein's a really good food to have, a really good protein. You need to have this before you go to bed so that you're anabolic while you sleep, right? But if we look at like the digestion time on something like steak or chicken, like that is not a fast release protein. I'm not going to say numbers off the top of my head because I'll bugger it up, but the digestion time on a steak is massive. Like it is substantially longer than anything you're going to get from a supplement. So I mean, if you're having a large amount of your protein at night in dinner, which most of us do, we have, I would say a lot of people, 40 to 50% of your protein for the day comes from your dinner, then realistically it's about weighing up whether or not an additional supplement at that time is actually going to help you, especially if you're doing it for the purposes of having a slow release protein. And the same thing for whey protein. Like when we talk about all supplements being, or protein supplements being a fast or slow release, we're talking about consuming them in isolation. I know there's a huge amount of recipes you can get out there now, which are, by all means, go for it, whether it's protein oats or protein brownies or protein cake or protein whatever you want. But as soon as you consume what we call a mixed food, protein, carbs, and fats together, as soon as you put your protein supplement in with something else, whether that's Greek yogurt or whether it's even just having it in milk as a protein shake, you're already massively slowing down the digestion time of that protein. And to not go too deep into another conversation, which we could have another time about how many protein kind of feedings you want through the day, it's just important to recognize that having your protein with other food is going to stop it from being as much of a fast release protein. That's not a bad thing, but it's just something to be aware of, right? So don't get sucked into the marketing if you're not going to use it as the product's listed anyway. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I would agree completely. And I would also add that the amount of protein you have on like a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis is going to be far more important than when you consume those proteins on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. So probably a lot of people jump the gun and start trying to micromanage the timing of their protein doses before they've even got a handle on how much protein they're getting consistently on a day-to-day basis. So start there, folks. If you're worried about the timing, make sure you're getting a good consistent amount, and make sure that amount is consistent with your goals before you start worrying about the timing of your protein.
100%. Yeah, we like the idea of fast releasing anything because no one wants a slow releasing, you don't want a slow releasing painkiller. You want something that'll punch you in the face as well. And I think a lot of people get sucked into marketing because of that. Yeah, maybe bad analogy, falls down a little bit. Mate, let's quickly.
The fast releasing ones are the most addictive.
Are they actually?
That's
the good stuff.
That's the good stuff. Let's go into creatine. So creatine's a really good one because it's one of my favorites to talk about. It's got a few myths around it, but like the coolest thing I find about creatine is just the overwhelming weight of evidence that shows that it's actually a pretty bloody good supplement, and it actually does what it claims to do, which is really, really cool. So like creatine is a specific amino acid. So we talked about amino acids basically being like the building blocks for protein. And creatine is a really cool one because what basically how you take it is you're supposed to take it like around 5 grams a day. And once your muscle cells are saturated with creatine is almost like used as like an energy buffer, and it can give you that little bit more like strength, power, and endurance by buffering adenosine triphosphate breakdown, so ATP breakdown, for all those exercise scientists out there listening to us. For those who aren't exercise scientists, just imagine you've got a car. Usually your car runs off petrol, but if your car can run off NOS, it can go that little bit harder and a little bit faster for a really short amount of time. And that's basically what creatine allows us to do. Just work that little bit harder, a little bit faster for that smaller amount of time. But those small increases in performance can end up yielding some pretty decent physiological adaptations over time. Like, just think, it's like if you can get an extra rep per set, but then you do that across the forms of multiple weeks or months, it's like that can probably help us build that little bit extra muscle mass. So the main benefits of creatine are that it improves muscle mass. It can improve strength, power, and endurance for more of our sports athletes. It shows to have decreases in fat-free mass, which is pretty cool. And it also has some cognitive benefits, which the research is still relatively new, but it's cool that it can basically, it shows that it's been linked to heightened neurophysiological performance, which is, yeah, I reckon that's pretty cool stuff for something which is very cheap and very effective, and you can just mix into your fruit juice every morning.
I think creatine must be one of those that kind of managed to make it into the mainstream before marketing could really get a hold of it, because with the amount of research we have and the amount of good evidence showing a lot of across the board benefits to creatine, it's amazing it's not more expensive, considering it's not expensive to produce a lot of these other things. It's literally the price of supplements must go up 300-500+%. Creatine's the only one that marketing hasn't really managed to get its claws into, and we've managed to downplay it for long enough that I think it would be a steep sell. I guess creatine monohydrate, what's the other one? What's the one that's like 3 times the price?
Creatine monohydrate's the most effective. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there are alternative forms of creatine which they attempt to sell for more money, and it is actually less effective than creatine monohydrate, which is the cheap basic bitch version, which is actually the most effective one and the best value for money. So don't get sucked into the market hype. Spend your money on creatine monohydrate. It is quite cheap. You'll probably be able to go get about a kilogram or so for like $20-$30. And then you only need to use 5 grams per day. So that 1 kilogram bag should last you a very long time.
Creatine HCl is the other one. And that I think was
hydrochloride. There you go.
That was the marketing companies realizing what they missed, trying to put something else scientific and fancy into it. And there is a lot of companies out there, and you should see the marketing spiels that they will build around something that's consistently shown to be not really any better, right? It's kind of like what Bcaa is to protein. So definitely stick with the monohydrate. You don't need to pay the extra dollars for something that isn't really going to have any potential benefit. So look, creatine, I'm going to throw out something there that I think is worth talking about when it comes to the benefits of creatine. And this has been more anecdotal, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Aaron. But I love creatine. I think almost everyone who's going to the gym consistently should take creatine. However, I think it is worth having a conversation that the main benefits in creatine that I see come from, like you said, allowing you to grind through that extra rep or two that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. Now, for me, if you're not training with a decent intensity, I think a lot of those benefits will probably fall away. What do you think about that, Aaron?
Yeah, I think that like a few other points that we can touch on. One is that individual response to creatine is actually shown to be a little bit different. So some people are almost like hyper responders to creatine. So some people might jump on creatine and all of a sudden be like, holy crap, like I can feel like I've blown up a bit, like straight away. They can just tell, like, it's like, wow, I just feel like I'm holding that little bit more glycogen in my muscles. I'm getting better pumps, things like that. Other people, they actually might not respond as well, which is very unfortunate. But yeah, I do think that some of the benefits I've seen from creatine, and this, like, as you said, with the whole like pushing yourself hard, I think overall it's like if your training is a higher quality, regardless of whether you are like if you're on creatine but your training is of a higher standard, you're no doubt going to get more benefit from it. It's like it's almost like unlocking a little bit more potential to adapt to your training. So it's like if your training is a higher standard, you're definitely going to get more gains. But I also think for a lot of young guys, it's like taking that creatine, and it might be a little bit of a placebo effect, but it's like, oh, this works, awesome. I'm going to train really hard because I know this works. And then that almost added placebo of like knowing that you're taking something which is actually going to work enables you to train that little bit harder, try that little bit harder, train a little bit close to failure, which is also very, very anabolic. Training close to failure in adequate volumes is also a very anabolic substance. So definitely do that if it's in your best interest to build muscle.
All right, that's probably a good way of putting it. You know, it's maybe a bit of a chicken and an egg thing as well. Is you know, regardless of whether or not it's placebo, if it does result in people training harder, then that's great. I just know for myself, you know, I've definitely been there as well. But there will be a lot of guys out there taking creatine who are not holding form well enough through a set to get the benefits out of it, right? If you're taking creatine and then you're doing a ridiculous drop set just because you can, you know, because it feels like it's training hard, unless you've actually learned how to push close to failure with good form, I think you are going to be leaving a fair bit in the table from a creatine standpoint. But you're absolutely right in saying that's probably more general across the board with everything to do with training, not just creatine. Mate, we have gotten through a lot so far. I'm gonna absolutely break your heart here because I know we're getting to some of your favorite ones, but I'm gonna let you pick from one of the last three we were gonna run through, because I do know we like to talk at the best of times. What's your favorite from these last three? Let's go.
I reckon we're going to go with caffeine because the other couple we might end up doing our own little podcast on the others once we've done a little bit more research into them. So let's touch on caffeine and the benefits and the effective usages of caffeine as a supplement. We talked a little bit about this already in our first podcast a few weeks ago, when we actually looked at some literature around coffee. So basically caffeine, if we're looking at caffeine is a molecule which allows us to jack up the sympathetic nervous system, so to become a little bit more stimulated. And the main benefits of caffeine are like increased focus, increased awareness, increased reaction time, and also has some benefits regarding acute performance, so like increased power output, increased strength. Not just that, but Braden would definitely agree that caffeine usually comes in lots of yummy forms, i.e. coffee. So having large amounts of caffeine a day is definitely in his best interest because it definitely makes him happier. When we're talking about caffeine in regards to dosages, so there's different dosages which we can tolerate. And I think that the big talking point around caffeine is how much caffeine should I take and how much is too much, because too much does exist. I would say that for most of the benefits, not necessarily from an elite performance standpoint, but just from benefits of caffeine, like cognitive and physiological, you'd probably want to start with a 100 milligram dose, which is about the equivalent of like one coffee shot, or like maybe like a small Red Bull. And then if you can tolerate that, you could work upwards. Some of the downsides of caffeine, if you have a little bit too much, that can result in anxiety, and anxiety can result in decreased sleep or poor quality sleep. And that's one of the biggest ones that I see. People over caffeinate and then they struggle to sleep. And the results of not being able to sleep for prolonged periods of time can be pretty bad. Like they're the kind of thing, like diseases such as like hypertension, cardiac events, diabetes, depression, like those comorbidities are all associated with poor quality sleep. So we definitely want to make sure that we're looking after ourselves with our sleep, making sure that if we are taking good stimulants like caffeine, we're using them effectively rather than at our detriment.
Let's talk half-life and I guess caffeine around working out. I read a few things recently talking about how, I mean, the threshold for improved performance from a physiological standpoint, I think is actually a lot higher than people realize. In that, a lot of the studies, particularly in strength training, where they'll actually see a positive benefit, I think the dosages are quite high. But if you compare that then with, like we've talked about, the absolutely positive effects, which is the placebo of coffee, right? When it makes you feel better, or caffeine, I should say. Yeah, my biases are showing. But the actual like placebo around, I've had caffeine, I'm going to train harder, versus what studies actually show on performance output. Do you know any of those numbers off the top of your head or concepts?
Yeah, I do. So basically, in regards to like actual performance enhancing dosages of caffeine, most of the literature points to 4 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. So you can actually do some quick maths on that. I'm sitting at about 90 kilos at the moment. So 6 9's 54. So I'd have to be having 540 milligrams of caffeine in one dosage to be able to get those kinds of benefits from a strength power perspective. 540 milligrams of caffeine in one dose is certainly not a small amount of caffeine. Like that's basically the equivalent of basically 1.5 liters of Red Bull, or a bit more than 1.5 liters of Red Bull for those playing along at home. So most people are going to get that amount of caffeine from like either like no dose, like a pill, or like a pre-workout powder or something else, because consuming that amount of liquid to get that amount of caffeine is probably not going to be very performance enhancing. So the doses that you need, like that 4 to 6 milligrams, like that is a lot more than people that's a lot more than people realize they need to take. And those are the dosages where chronic exposure would often probably see those detriments in sleep. You said to touch on half-lives, like your typical half-lives for caffeine is around 4 to 6 hours for the average individual. Some will metabolize caffeine that little bit faster if they've got that the caffeine polymorphism in the CYP1A2 enzyme, which is a liver enzyme which metabolizes caffeine. But yeah, the average is 4 to 6 hours, which means that every 4 to 6 hours, the amount of caffeine in your bloodstream is going to halve. So let's say that I have a coffee at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and I've got 100 milligrams of caffeine in my bloodstream. Let's say we give that 6 hours, so 7 p.m. at night, I'll still have 50 milligrams of caffeine in my bloodstream, which is a bit like, that's like half a coffee. It's like taking half a coffee and going to bed. Probably not going to be the best. Like you probably do want to, especially from those higher doses, bias your caffeine intake towards the morning. Allow yourself to get those benefits in the morning, but then also allowing majority of that caffeine to clear its way out of the bloodstream by the time it's ready for bed, so you can get a nice night's sleep and get all the benefits of sleep. Best of both worlds, stimulants and sleep.
That'll be our first tagline for the merch when it comes out. That is actually unreal. Like when you put it in those terminologies of like how much Red Bull you'd have to drink, or I think a standard shot of coffee is like 85 milligrams of caffeine or something like that. So we're talking like 6 or 7. By the way, congrats on little flex of going up a weight class there. But if that's a lot of coffee, right? If like a long black is a double shot or something like that. Long black is an Americano for our non-Australian listeners. But like you're having, I think, 6 to 8 kind of shots of coffee. And I think it's about that 2-hour window pre-workout, which is not how people take it, right? I have coffee as my quote unquote pre-workout. I have a long black on my way into the gym or when I'm in the gym, right? I'm probably not seeing a lot of physiological benefits from training. But again, with hypertrophy training, I think the attitude, trying to build muscle or trying to have a good session, whatever your goal is, I think it's more about the placebo going into it, right? If you're doing extreme strength output, you're a powerlifter or a weightlifter, that's where the performance benefits across a 1 rep max, like across a low rep, actually matter. And that's where the super high dosages are going to be, I think, more practically useful. But again, like Aaron talked about, it's very individual dependent. And I know a lot of powerlifters and weightlifters, more so, a lot of powerlifters love getting themselves like psyched up and playing the heavy music and slapping themselves around before they lift. And you're in quite a high arousal, high anxiety state anyway. If you throw 500 or 600 milligrams of caffeine, and on top of that, you're actually risking, like, in the sport term, what we call over arousal, and you're actually potentially compromising your ability to perform the lift, which is actually going to be a bit of a detriment. I mean, so this could be a tangent that we can save for another time. But I mean, Aaron, you've worked with a lot of powerlifters. I've done a few powerlifting comps back in the day, nothing impressive. You've worked with a lot of powerlifting athletes, Aaron. Have you seen that be like that over arousal be an effect? Have you seen people use high dosages caffeine effectively?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things to do, and I stress this in all sport disciplines, like whether it's powerlifting, bodybuilding, whatever, but you don't want to be getting to the day and then basically throwing Hail Marys or making massive variable changes. And I see that all the time. I'll turn up to like a local powerlifting meet and some 50-kilogram female who's basically hasn't had a coffee in 3 years has just smacked 400 milligrams of caffeine, and she's practically convulsing because her body doesn't know what to do with it. And then her coach is trying to tell her to go out and squat. She's got no idea like what way's up or down or sideways or anything. And so with caffeine, as like especially caffeine, which is like it's a stimulant which you do usually need to take in higher doses to get those performance enhancing benefits. You want to work out approximately like where your individual tolerance sits and like where your state of arousal sits when you lift. And you want to be hopefully replicating that multiple weeks or hopefully months away from competition, so that when you do get to like closer and closer to competition, you know exactly like when you're going to lift, when to take your caffeine, how much caffeine to take, what state of arousal you want to be in. And that's also going to be very like independent and individual. I know some lifters. We've got some incredibly talented lifters at JPS. We've got people who basically break national records cool as a cucumber, and we've got people who break national records stimulate like with enough caffeine to kill a small donkey, and they're running around the back screaming and punching holes in walls just before they go and like squat an Australian record. So like your actual individual tolerance is going to be very different. That's something that an athlete and their coach should be working on away from competition, so that there is a game plan day of, okay, you're lifting at 11 a.m. We weigh in at 9 a.m. We know that we want to take 300 milligrams of caffeine at around like just after weigh-ins, because that's about how much you need. Any more and you're probably going to be a little bit too anxious, and anything less in like we're probably not going to be getting those physiological effects. But yeah, that's kind of a job for a coach and their athlete to really work out.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really good practical in the trenches take home. And I can picture some of the lifters you're talking about. I've seen them squat a few times, and there's some atrocious scenes going on behind the scenes. So look, that pretty much brings us to the end of it. So, I mean, the other ones we were going to talk about was vitamin D and fish oil. And I know Aaron has a particular interest, a few of those, but we're at dangerous risk of making a whole podcast based on those. So if there are any supplements that we haven't covered, do message us on Instagram or leave a comment on the YouTube video, and let us know what else you would like to see us cover. Aaron, do you want to kick us off with a bit of a TLDR recap? What have we gone over today? But more importantly, let's just put some things in the bin and let's put some things on the shelf. What is going in the supplement bin in the Hoey household?
Right. So in the bin, first up, we've got BCAAs and fat burners. They're both going in the bin, and we're going to save our money on those because they're just not going to do it for us. Test boosters, they're going in the bin. If you do need something to boost your testosterone, as Braden said, it's going to be something which you're probably better off going over the counter or under the counter, preferably over the counter. So check with your local medical professional for that one. But anything which says it's going to boost your testosterone and turn you into like basically an alpha male Jason Momoa, Conan the Barbarian, that can go in the bin. We don't need that. What's going on the shelf? So protein, if you struggle to hit your protein and you need a cheap, convenient source of protein powder, that's definitely going on the shelf. What type of protein you get is going to be down to your individual goals and needs. Creatine's going on our shelf. It's got a great cost to benefit ratio. And yeah, it's just a really, really effective supplement. The only caveat is the muscle cells need to be saturated for it to be effective, which requires long-term use. So don't use creatine the same way you use caffeine. Make sure you're taking your 5 grams of creatine a day to get that long-term chronic benefit. And then the last one, which is going on the shelf, or it probably doesn't make it to the shelf in Braden's house, it goes straight into his hand and then straight down his gullet, is caffeine. So caffeine, pick your poison, whether it's going to be a Red Bull, a coffee, or like maybe even just a no-dose tablet. And then assess your tolerance, probably start low and then increase slow. And just, find where your tolerance sits, find out what doses you like, find out what methods you like what kind you like, whether it's like a coffee or a pill or whatever, and go from there. That's my TLDR recap.
Mate, that's absolutely perfect. I have nothing to add. You've nailed it. All the coaching and reading you've been doing away from the camera is paying off. Mate, any final words, anything coming up, any studies that you'd like for us to cover over the next few weeks that we can give a little tease, or haven't got that far yet?
Oh, probably haven't got that far. It's been a very busy week at uni, so I'll have a big sleep, Braden. I'll sleep on it, and I'll let you know in the morning.
We've got a few different things that Aaron's kind of been throwing out there as well about some of the psychological effects of things like fish oil. I know there's a few studies relating to esports that I want to dive into. And I think after our conversation today, we're going to have to do a deep dive on both the practical, and we're going to probably have to go a little bit philosophical on the science and I guess the intention behind placebo, because that, I think, is going to be a little bit of a passion project for us. So we'll wrap it up there, but hope you've got some value from this as always. And Aaron, I really appreciate your time. We'll chat soon.
Absolutely. Catch you next time, Braden.
And that's everything for today on this episode of the Too Long Didn't Read Fitness podcast. If you can take a second to like, subscribe, leave a comment, share, whatever it is, it all goes a long way to help us boost our little ranking within the algorithm. Thank you to everyone that's left reviews and comments already. It goes a long way. And if you would like to support us a little bit further, you can go through the link on my Instagram or the link in the description, and you can actually buy us a coffee. We aim to put out as much high quality content as we can on as many different free forms of social media as possible. So if you've got some value out of this and you would like to give back in some way, consider pay as much as you think the episode is worth. You can do that through the Buy Me a Coffee link, which will be available somewhere in the description box. If not, that's absolutely fine too. You can help us out other ways by sharing, doing whatever you can, just tell your friends about it, and hopefully they can get some value out of this too. Or if you've got any kind of feedback or thoughts or any topics you'd like us to cover, you can send me or Aaron a message over on Instagram. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode and hope you're great.